Godzilla and Kong: The New Empire is just a few days from release. With that in mind, we here at Kaiju United thought it would be fun to recap everything that's happened in the MonsterVerse so far, from Godzilla 2014 to Monarch: Legacy of Monsters. We are excluding the Netflix Skull Island anime since most people in the fandom consider that soft canon, and also no one on the Kaiju United staff has seen it, so sorry in advance if you're one of the 5 people who actually cared about that show. So without further ado, let's get started. In 1999, Dr. Ishiro Serizawa, a representative for a secret government organization known as Monarch, is sent to the Philippines where a freak mining collapse has taken place. He, along with his assistant Vivian Graham, take a team into the cavern to investigate further and find a gigantic skeleton belonging to a member of Godzilla's species. Inside the skeleton, they discover 2 massive spores and find that one is broken free. We're then introduced to nuclear physicist Joe Brody, who is living with his wife Sandra and their son Ford in the fictional city of Jinjira, Japan. Joe is suspicious of seismic activity occurring near the plant, so he sends Sandra and a team to investigate. The plant's reactor suddenly starts to melt down and radiation breaches the plant, killing Sandra and destroying the entire facility. 15 years pass, and Ford is now an explosives disposal officer for the US Navy, returning home to San Francisco to his wife Elle and their son Sam. Elle gets a call that Joe has been arrested in Japan after trying to enter the now abandoned Jinjira. After the meltdown at the power plant, the government quarantined the entire city, attributing the incident to an earthquake that leaked radiation, rendering the city uninhabitable. However, Joe is skeptical about this and has devoted his entire life to finding the real answer to get closure on Sandra's death. Ford tries to convince Joe to come home with him, but he refuses, stating that he's been picking up frequencies coming from the power plant similar to the ones that were recorded on the day of the meltdown. He's determined to return to the family's old house to get his records that will prove that an earthquake didn't cause the reactor meltdown. The two successfully venture into the quarantine zone and discover that the air is not contaminated at all, furthering Joe's suspicions. After securing the tapes, the two find that the power plant is seemingly operational and are arrested by the authorities. They're then brought to the power plant where an outpost has been set up to study and contain a huge cocoon which contains the creature that escaped from the Philippines and is responsible for the reactor meltdown. Joe's data is brought to the attention of Dr. Serizawa, who is among the scientists studying the creature. Joe tells them that whatever they're hiding must be destroyed, and without warning, the creature begins to hatch. It proceeds to destroy the plant, killing several workers as well as fatally injuring Joe before sprouting wings and flying away. Ford is then brought aboard the USS Saratoga, where he's introduced to Serizawa and Graham. They reveal to him that they work for Monarch, a secret multinational organization tasked with locating and studying giant monsters, all while keeping them concealed from the public eye. Graham states that Monarch was founded after the accidental awakening of an alpha predator, one they call Godzilla, who hasn't been seen since the 1950s. They ask Ford if he knows anything about Joe's research, and he tells them that he remembers Joe had been tracking some form of echolocation, leading Serizawa and Graham to believe the creature was calling out to something. Ford is then taken to an airport in Hawaii where he hopes to catch a flight home. Meanwhile, after a Russian nuclear submarine has been reported missing, a US Special Forces team is dispatched and finds it in the woods outside Honolulu. They also find the creature from Jinjira, now dubbed Muto, feeding off the radiation from the sub's torpedoes. After fighter jets engage, the Muto emits an EMP surge, knocking out power across the island. Back at sea, Godzilla, sensing the Muto's presence, makes landfall and for the first time in 10 years marches triumphantly back onto the screen and lets out an earth-shattering roar. The two monsters engage in battle, which is cut short after the Muto flies away, with Godzilla in pursuit. The morning after the attack, Ford links up with the military en route to the mainland where the monsters are heading. Serizawa and Graham have discovered that the Muto was calling out to the second spore found in the Philippines. The spore was thought to be dormant and is now being held at a nuclear waste depository in Nevada. Forces are dispatched to the vault and find that a second, much larger Muto has escaped and is in the process of destroying Las Vegas. It's theorized that the larger Muto is a female and the smaller one is a male who had been calling out to it with the intention of mating. A plan is drawn up to lure Godzilla and the Mutos out to sea using nuclear warheads to kill them, much to Serizawa's disapproval as he believes that Godzilla is the only thing that can kill the Mutos. Ford volunteers to help transport the missiles via train to San Francisco so he can get to his family. While en route, he explains that due to the Muto's ability to knock out everything electric, an analog timer must be used to detonate the nukes. The convoy is then attacked by the female Muto, who kills all the soldiers and eats one of the missiles. Ford survives and along with the remaining nuke is taken to San Francisco where citizens are being evacuated. Elle leaves Sam with a coworker to be taken out of the city while she stays behind and waits for Ford. Later at the Golden Gate Bridge, Godzilla surfaces and the military opens fire in a failed attempt to prevent him from entering the city. At the same time, the last remaining nuke is armed and is set to detonate, but suddenly the male Muto emits an EMP before flying down and stealing the warhead. As the female enters the city, he presents it to her and she begins to build a nest. Ford learns that while Sam is safe, Elle hasn't been accounted for and might still be trapped. Hoping to save her, he joins a Halo drop team who are being sent into the city to manually deactivate the nuke. The Halo team begins their operation and descend upon San Francisco, only to find that the battle between Godzilla and the male Muto has left the city in scorched ruins. The team lands and regroups at the female's nest, where she's in the process of laying several eggs around the warhead. Godzilla interrupts, lets out another earth-shattering roar, and the female joins the battle. Seeing an opportunity, the team enters the nest, only to find that the timer to the bomb is stuck shut. With time running out, they decide to go with Plan B, which is to load the missile onto a boat and get it as far away from the shore as possible. Ford stays behind and opens up a tanker truck to fill the nest with gasoline, destroying the nest and all of the eggs. The female Muto, understandably pissed about all this, sees Ford crawling away, but Godzilla comes to the rescue and unleashes his atomic breath. He readies to finish her off, but the male Muto attacks Godzilla from behind. But before he can get the upper hand, Godzilla tail whips him into a building, killing him but forcing the building to collapse. Ford gets to the boat and with the female Muto distracted, begins sailing away from the city. However, the female Muto catches up with him and goes in to finish him off. Once again, Godzilla serves as a deus ex machina, grabbing the female by the neck and delivering a blast of atomic breath down her throat. With both of the Mutos dead, power and electric is restored to the city, and Ford is rescued as the boat's autopilot brings the nuke to a safe distance out to sea. After the chaos is all over the next day, Elle is also rescued and the family reunites. Godzilla then wakes up from a much-needed post-fight nap and begins to walk back towards the ocean. He lets out one last victory roar before getting in the water and swimming away. Kong Skull Island takes place in 1973. Agents Bill Randa and Houston Brooks attempt to secure funding for an expedition to recently discovered Skull Island in a last-ditch effort to save Monarch, which is on the verge of being shut down after years of coming up empty-handed in the search for giant monsters. The two successfully secure funding to piggyback on an expedition with a Landsat team that is also planning on visiting the island, as well as a military escort. They also recruit former SAS tracker James Conrad and anti-war photographer Mason Weaver. Once en route, the military is briefed about their mission and that their primary objective is to help Landsat map the island. It's also mentioned that a perpetual storm system surrounding the island will render radio communication with the ship impossible. Brooks explains that seismic charges will be dropped from the helicopters to help better understand the density of the Earth. This raises concerns from Conrad, who immediately becomes skeptical of the true intentions of the expedition and soon discovers that Weaver also has suspicions. The morning of the expedition arrives and the military escort of helicopters braves the storm and reaches the island. One soldier with clearly a good taste in music starts blasting Black Sabbath as the operation begins. The helicopters begin dropping the seismic charges but are quickly interrupted by an angry Kong who begins knocking them out of the sky one by one. After the attack, the survivors are split into two groups, one led by Conrad and the other led by the helicopter squadron's leader, Colonel Packard. Packard confronts Randa, who reveals that he works for Monarch and that his true intentions of going to the island were to use the seismic charges to lure out any potential monsters. Randa urges Packard to get the survivors off the island and send in a more prepared force to kill Kong. However, Packard is determined to do it himself. He then leads his group in search of a downed helicopter for its munitions and its pilot, Major Jack Chapman. Meanwhile, Conrad's group stumbles upon a group of island natives known as the Iwi and Lieutenant Hank Marlowe, a World War II pilot who crashed on the island 28 years earlier, along with a Japanese pilot named Gunpei Akari. As the group is brought into the Iwi village, Marlowe begins to tell them how Kong is God on the island and the last of his kind. He also explains that Kong is the only one that can stop the threat of the Skull Crawlers, vicious reptilian creatures living below the island that have threatened the Iwis for generations, including a giant-sized one responsible for killing Kong's parents. Conrad tells Marlowe that there's a chance to get off the island with an extraction team that is set to arrive on the north end of the island in 3 days' time. Marlowe says there's no way to get there in time on foot and reveals to them the Gray Fox, a boat that he and Gunpei had been building out of their crashed planes but remains unfinished ever since Gunpei got eaten by a skullcrawler. Meanwhile, Chapman is still on his own and attempts to get in contact with the other groups. After trying and failing, he comes face to face with a giant stick insect and is suddenly eaten by a skullcrawler. The next day, Conrad's group successfully fixes the Gray Fox and sets off for the north end of the island. While sailing up the river, they manage to get into radio contact with the others and the two groups reunite. However, Packard refuses to leave until he finds Chapman, and despite Marlowe's warning that his current position is full of skullcrawlers, the group sets out in search. They soon reach a mass grave containing the remains of Kong's parents and are confronted by the same skullcrawler that killed Chapman, who spits up his dog tags. The skullcrawler begins attacking the group, killing Randa and several of Packard's men. Weaver throws a lighter into a gas vent and the ensuing explosion kills the skullcrawler. Conrad reveals to Packard that Chapman is dead and that they must head for the north end of the island. But Packard intends to find the downed helicopter and use the munitions on board to set a trap and kill Kong. He blames Kong for killing his men and is hell-bent on getting revenge. However, the others try to tell him that killing Kong would be a mistake due to the threat of the skullcrawlers. An argument breaks out and Conrad tells Packard that he can take his men to do as they want while he takes the others to the boat. As night falls, Weaver and Conrad have an up-close encounter with Kong while trying to locate the Gray Fox. This encounter is soon interrupted by explosions being set off by Packard's soldiers, luring Kong into their trap. Conrad and Weaver realize they can't let Kong be killed, so they rush to tell the others that they need to stop Packard. Brooks and Dr. Sand head back to the boat while Marlowe joins Weaver and Conrad. As Kong approaches, Packard sets the water ablaze with napalm, causing Kong to collapse unconscious. The soldiers then place the leftover seismic charges around him and prepare to finish him off. Weaver, Conrad, and Marlowe arrive and hold Packard at gunpoint. His men turn on him as well, and suddenly the giant skull crawler, dubbed Skull Devil, rises from the lake. Everyone retreats from the area except for Packard, who stays to carry out his plan. Before he has a chance to detonate the charges, Kong wakes up and crushes him under his fist and begins to do battle with the Skull Devil, but is once again taken down. As dawn breaks, the group continues to flee with the Skull Devil in pursuit. Fortunately, Kong comes to the rescue and the battle resumes. The Skull Devil hurls Kong into the chains of an old shipwreck and prepares to eat him, but just in time, Brooks and San arrive with the Gray Fox. Weaver shoots a flare into the Skull Devil's eye, buying Kong time to break free from the chains and impale the Skull Devil with an old boat propeller. Kong slams the Skull Devil onto the side of the cliff Weaver was standing on, causing her to fall into the water. He then uses the boat propeller to slit the throat of the Skull Devil, seemingly killing it. He rescues Weaver, but out of nowhere, the Skull Devil returns and attempts to swallow Kong's fist, with Weaver still inside of it. Using all of his strength, Kong rips his hand free along with the Skull Devil's insides, finishing it off once and for all. Kong sets Weaver on the ground and she regains consciousness. She and Conrad embrace each other as they watch Kong walk away. The group rejoices as they sail down the river where they are finally rescued, bringing their nightmarish journey to an end. In the after-credits scene, Conrad and Weaver are being held in a Monarch facility. Brooks and Sand enter the room and explain to them that Skull Island is just the beginning, and that there are more monsters out there. They're then shown pictures depicting cave paintings of Godzilla, Rodan, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, setting up the characters for the next movie in the MonsterVerse, Godzilla, King of the Monsters.